Keeping Connecticut's essential workers safe on the job is always a priority, and it is certainly heightened during this pandemic, and many of those workers are in Congressman Joe Courtney's district. He's joining me now via Skype. Congressman, welcome back to Face the Facts.
Great to be here, Mike. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. And we've heard that Electric Boat's president and a number of workers at EB have now tested positive. That's an essential business, as we know. What's being done to try to keep these defense contractors safe on the job?
So it's not only an essential business, it's also been deemed by the U.S. Department of Defense as critical infrastructure, like every Navy shipyard from Maine to Virginia and over on the West Coast. You're right. I mean, we've had unfortunately, some positive test results down at Electric Boat. Again, they had already begun a process of trying to make it easier for people to take sick leave, to where practical, do more teleworking. But again, because of the classified nature of a lot of that work, it's very hard from a cybersecurity standpoint and also just a capacity standpoint to, do teleworking with the average laptop from home. But there is some of that going on. Starting on Sunday, they also are going to institute a new shift plan where basically they're going to divide the shipyard in half in terms of the workforce and do a blue and gold team. So 4 hours on, 4 days on, 4 days off, alternating shifts with the blue team and the gold team. That will reduce, again, density and also reduce the risk of being exposed to someone who has tested positive. And again, there's, obviously a lot more I think temperature testing, which they're recommending that workers do before they come to work. And I think there's going to be some face covering that's going to be issued starting again this weekend. People have been told already to follow the CDC standards in terms of face coverings, but they really need to have FDA-approved surgical masks to do the important work they're doing. I would note last weekend, the USS Vermont, which is one of the subs that's under construction there, was sent off to sea to begin sea trials, which again is a great testament to the commitment and loyalty and just work ethic of the people who work down there at that yard. It's a very special place, and we want to make sure they're all safe and healthy, and really stop the positive test results that have cropped up.
Now, Congressman, your district has the fewest cases of COVID-19 right now. What steps are being taken to help the spread from stopping in that region? And we've heard also some concerns that it's really because of a lack of testing. Can you speak to that?
So, I think there's a lack of testing across the state and across the country. There are drive-through testing that are going on at places like Backus Hospital and L&M Hospital. I think it's also encouraging that there really has not been that many hospital admissions, which is certainly another indicator. But again, I don't think anyone should be complacent at all about trying to make sure that people experiencing symptoms who a doctor directs to have a test gets a test. And I know the governor talks about the state's efforts to get more testing resources into Connecticut. I think then we'll have a much better understanding of what's actually out there. But I will say this, the people in my district have been incredibly disciplined in terms of really following the CDC guidelines and the social distancing. And that's the best guarantee and the best way to make sure that if there is any sort of lower volume that's out here, that it's going to stay that way.
What's your opinion of the federal response when it comes to personal protective equipment? Are we doing enough for Connecticut on the federal level?
So, unfortunately, we're in sort of a Hunger Games situation right now. Congresswoman DeLauro organized a delegation call with the FEMA director, Mr. Gaynor, last Friday, who thanked Congress for the CARES Act, which put a huge infusion of money, $16 billion for PPE. His problem is that there's just not enough U.S.-based supply because we've offshored so much of that supply chain over the years. So that, FEMA is in the position of having to compete with other countries in terms of trying to boost that supply chain. We're seeing, obviously, some pretty impressive stories out there about private individuals who are helping the cause here in the state of Connecticut. When this, hopefully this outbreak subsides as a country, we really need to almost have a 9/11 commission to look at this whole question of what's happened to critical supply of medical devices that are critical to deal with, these types of pandemic outbreaks. We have been far too vulnerable and exposed because of the fact that, again, things like masks and gowns and N95s have all been offshored, and it's really left our entire country vulnerable.
Quick other question. Earlier this week, you called for the Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Moldly, to resign after he made those disparaging remarks about the captain of the USS Roosevelt, Brett Crozier. Now the Navy needs a secretary and a captain. Is our Navy in crisis? Like, what happened that led to this, and where are we now?
So, again, the situation at the USS Theodore Roosevelt obviously was a nightmare. And I think Captain Crozier, who had an absolutely impeccable record of military service, there was no question, he was on a career path and trajectory to become a flag officer, full admiral. He obviously was totally frustrated when he pulled that ship into Guam, and basically the crew was not let off the ship for 48 hours, even though, his medical team was identifying positive test results and the numbers were climbing fast. So he did put out what I would call, just a flare, a warning flare, really alerting people within the Navy. He did not release it to the press. That is really actually pretty well established. It did get out, obviously, into the public domain. And in my opinion, the Secretary of the Navy, acting Secretary at the time, Mr. Moldly, overreacted and stripped him of his position. The reaction of the crew, that's one of those viral videos that really, in my opinion, powerfully reflected what the crew thought of that decision. And unfortunately, Captain Crozier's fears continue to mount every single day. It's almost 500 cases now have been identified with positive test results since they pulled into Guam. They are starting to rotate crew off the ship. In any case, Moldly, in my opinion, and I talked to him, by the way, before he made the decision to strip Crozier of his command, and told him it was a mistake and he shouldn't do it. As chairman of the Sea Power Committee, he did call to give me that heads up. Again, he obviously just doubled down in terms of that mistake by going out there and insulting Captain Crozier while he was actually in quarantine, which, again, I think just created this unbelievable backlash that resulted in his resignation. The new acting secretary is actually a former Admiral McPherson, who I think is going to be a steady hand to try and really calm this situation down. They are getting help to the folks at Roosevelt. They also, I think, are putting into place better protocol for dealing with ships before they go underway, because, again, that's a very tough situation if there's an outbreak aboard a ship, some cases thousands of miles away from, adequate medical facilities. So again, they've actually put in a good system to deal with that. There is a gentleman that's been nominated to become full secretary. We'll see whether, with the remaining time of this administration, he's going to make it or not. The chief of naval operations is Admiral Gilday, who, again, has been in touch with my staff in the subcommittee. He's a solid guy. He's coming over to testify at the Armed Services Committee next week. Again, I think there's going to be obviously a lot of member questions, not just about what happened at the Roosevelt, but frankly, your question, Mike, about whether or not, our Navy, which is such a critical part of our national defense, really has a leadership in place and a plan in place to deal with COVID. And I'm actually pretty confident that Admiral Gilday, understands the kind of crisis of confidence that was created with the events of the last couple of weeks, and is very focused on a message, not just to Congress, but to the American people, that their Navy is in good hands.
Do we expect Captain Crozier to get his job back?
Well, I certainly called for a review of that decision. Right now, there is an investigation by the Vice CNO, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Burke, who we hope actually is going to have a report by the time of the hearing next week. And, we obviously, pick up intel, from on our committee in terms of, the events that surrounded that decision. And I personally hope he gets reinstated. If nothing else, making this decision without even an investigation, as you can infer from what I'm saying, they're now investigating after the fact, which is just totally unfair. This guy should be, in my opinion, reinstated. I think his crew would celebrate that decision, because I think they really believed he had their interest in his heart. And that clearly came through loud and clear when they gave him the send-off.
At that viral video, yeah. Okay, one last question. There was another relief package announced today from Washington. Do you believe that's going to help hospitals and/or businesses moving forward?
Well, again, it still hasn't come together yet. I mean, there's consensus that the small business lending program needs another infusion because, again, just the volume of applications and approval is happening at just, record-breaking pace. What's under negotiation right now is whether or not the hospitals are going to get also another infusion of help, which I think they need in terms of just the volume of patients, the complexity of the treatment for an airborne pathogen, and also the loss of revenue because they've pretty much canceled all elective procedures. So hospitals need more help, and we should include that in that package, as well as a boost to nutrition programs. I mean, the pictures of food banks with people lining up, we're hearing this from Meals program in Eastern Connecticut, like St. Vincent de Paul over in Norwich. Again, they are swamped. And so, we're talking about food, we're talking about healthcare, and we're also talking about protecting jobs. That's a good package, and we should come together and pass it with a strong bipartisan vote, just like we did with phase 1, 2, and 3 COVID legislation.
Let's hope so. Congressman Courtney, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Stay safe, and we really appreciate your time once again.
You too, Mike. Thank you.
This is Face the Facts with NBC Connecticut.